Hi there. Today I'm going to do a how-to on making a simple bracelet for my friend Tammy. We have a clasp and a couple of jump rings, some crimps and crimp covers, and some line. This line is called beading wire, but it's actually a very fine cable with a vinyl coating on it. I think it's vinyl anyway, some kind of plastic coating, and some beads. It's helpful to have some flat nose pliers. 2 pairs is really handy, although your old-fashioned garden variety, let's see if I have some here, needle nose pliers out of the hardware tool chest will probably work. I made a bunch of my first jewelry with needle nose, and some cutters will be helpful. So proceeding, I'm going to make a 7.5-inch bracelet. This is a strand that I got on sale probably at Michael's or Joann's, someplace like that. And so it's got beads and then the metal accent beads, and so I'm just going to make it up just like this for a 7.5-inch bracelet. And so I'll snip this at one end, and a smart thing to do is to secure one end of your line either with a clip if you have one, paper clip, not a paper clip, a clothespin will do, this will do, or you can go ahead and secure it to the first end of your clasp. So how that works is you put on your crimp bead. I usually like to add a buffer bead, and then you could put your line right through the hole in the end of the clasp, and then put your line back through your buffer bead and your crimp bead, and pull that little tail. You want to leave about 1.5 inches or 2 inches of tail there. You're going to pull your beads up over that, because if your tail is really short, if something should happen and your crimp is loose enough for a hard pull to pull that loose, then there goes all your work. So get hold of your crimp bead and push your buffer bead right up to the edge. You want to give yourself enough room to, you don't want this to be so tight that it can't move at all, but you don't want it to be so loose that it's too floppy. So pull it up there, and let's see if we're in frame here. Okay, and just squeeze that crimp bead flat there, like so. See if that worked. Yep, just squeeze it flat like so. And if you want to try to use your crimp covers, you can. They're awful fiddly. How I do that is I get hold of them between my fingers like this and slip that crimp in. And then wrap that line around my finger, and then ever so carefully, careful, because you can smash these beads, ever so carefully close it up. You don't have to use those crimp covers if you don't want to, though. They're real fiddly to try to use. But if you want to try to use it, that's how. So that secures one end of our line. I will string on about 6 1/4 inches of beads. And if they're, if you're stringing them on straight from another strand, that's pretty easy. You can usually just put your line in the bead hole and pull them off like so. Snug those lines up together and move the beads from one line to the other. These beads that come on strands at the craft store, that's a temporary strand. I wouldn't try to make a bracelet out of that. It would be too easy to break. So now we're just beading the beads onto the line. There. See, now that we're coming back to the other end, you can string those beads up over that tail, you see, and that helps keep it tidy and tucks it in neatly, like so. I don't know what kind of beads Tammy has for her project, but it doesn't really matter. The main thing is to remember that your clasp is going to add some length to your project, and to adjust the length of your beading according to that. Okay. There. All right. All right. Now I'm going to put my crimp bead on and a buffer bead for the other end, and I'll pull that off, and we're going to go through here. Okay. Now this might be a little bit tricky because you've got your jump ring on there, and your line needs to come around the jump ring and back through your buffer and crimp beads. Some of this is going to go off camera, I think. So back through here and back through your crimp bead, and again you want 1.5 or 2 inches of tail there going back through your beads, about like so. We'll go to here, I think. That should be enough. And then as you pull your line up, like so. Wise to hold on to that right there. Make sure you've got hold of that line, because it's going to want to let go. It's going to want to get loose. And then take your, let's see, this one here we want to have a little bit tighter than the other side. Okay, let's see here. So now I'm just going to cinch that up and pull it up a little bit more. Hold on to it there so it doesn't get loose on you. Okay. And then take your flat nose or your needle nose right in there and smash that crimp bead. When I'm using a flat nose or needle nose, I like to crimp it from both sides, see, so that it's flat now. It was a tube and now it's flat. And again, we're going to attempt that crimp cover. This is optional. You certainly don't have to do this if you don't want to. And then lay that crimp inside there. And again, I usually like to hold on to it at one end and lay the strand over my finger, and then ever so carefully close that crimp cover. Oop. Yeah, that's what you don't want to do, is make it snap like that. I've smashed crimp covers before. It's just fiddly. So then you take your cutters and you get as close into that line as you possibly can. Try not to go at it this way because it's too easy to accidentally cut your line. But get hold of it like this and get as close as you can and give it a snip. And there you go. Voila. Let's see if I can put it on myself. So there it is. There's a bracelet with a lobster clasp and jump rings. And let's do it again. That was fun. Some nice quartz crystal tumbled nuggets. Use our nippers to... I don't think I can get in there to reach that knot. Maybe. Yeah, looky there. Okay. I think I'm going to separate these with some little clear mirror inside beads. These are some pretty little beads that I get, and they're on these temporary strands. And they've been all jumbled up in a little plastic bag. We'll try not to make too big of a mess with them. It's raining here today in Fort Worth. Raining a frog strangler. Let's see here. This might work. This is some beading wire that is pearl colored, and it's 0.014 inch, and I think that will work. There we go. So I'm going to pull out about a little bit more than a foot of it. And cut it off right there. A light colored line is a nice thing when you've got clear beads. Okay, so we'll pick up that crimp bead and a buffer bead. I'm going to hang on to this line so that crimp bead doesn't come sliding off the other end. There we go. Okay, and then we'll go through the hole in our clasp right there, and then back through the buffer bead and back through the crimp bead. And now we've got a tail of about 1.5 inches or 2 inches, and then we'll pull the working thread snug, and I'm going to hold on to both of those right there. I'm going to get hold of this crimp bead here and cinch it up and then crimp. And when I'm crimping this way to make a flat crimp, I like to get it from both sides. Make sure you don't get your buffer bead. Okay, there's a nice flat crimp. Okay. Now this end was a little bit wrinkled, so we'll cut that wrinkle off. Wouldn't that be nice if you could just cut your wrinkles off? And so I'm going to have a little bead in between each one of these nuggets to kind of separate them a little bit so that they'll drape easier. Give them a little bit more graceful drape. It is raining to beat the band outside. I'm glad I'm not in a hurry to go back in the house. I'm out in my studio here doing this. So now we can pull this up. There. And we can make sure it's good and snug on that jump ring. And again, hold on to this tail so that it doesn't loosen itself up on you. Make sure I've got it. And then get in there with your flat nose or needle nose ever so carefully. Make sure you're not going to break one of these beads here. And squeeze. And again, when I'm making a flat crimp, I like to make sure I've squeezed it from both sides. Then you can give it the dreaded pull test. It's quite secure, as is that one. And then we'll find our cutters, come in here and trim that line. Get as close as you can, taking care not to cut the strand that you just threaded. And there's a nice little crystal nugget bracelet.